But it's interesting, if we look at the lectures we heard this evening, we went from Tzfat in the 16th century back to Matan Torah over 3,000 years ago. Then we skipped through Jewish art. We skipped to the book of Ruth. We listened to some ancient and modern Jewish music. We listened to a wonderful biography of King David with Rabbi Wolpe. We learned some Hasidus with Reb Mimi. And Reb Mimi said she lives in the 19th century. Well, I guess in Poland, if I had to choose, I'd say I live in the medieval period in about 5 or 6 different countries. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about some minagim of Shavuot. And as Rabbi Shikli explained when he talked about the Tikkun, if you look at the Shulchan Aruch, I'm holding up here 1/6 of the Mishnah Berurah, 1/6 of Orach Chaim, the first section of the Shulchan Aruch, and most of this volume, up until paragraph 494, is devoted to the laws of Pesach. So you see here the laws of Pesach, right? Pretty substantial, right? And then you come to the laws of Shavuot. 1 page, guys, 2 sides of a page. That's the laws of Shavuot. So what did the Jews do? Since there were no laws, they made up customs. They made up minagim. And over the years, I've written many articles and responses about these minagim, and I'd like to talk about 3 of them in the limited time that we have together. So we're going to look for, here we go. And we're going to talk about 3 minagim. Licking honey from the slate, which started in medieval Ashkenaz, Germany, and France in the 13th, perhaps the 12th century. Dairy products and Shavuot, which is mentioned for the first time in the late 13th century in France. And Chag HaMayim, the festival of water, which is a wonderful North African custom of water fights on the holiday of Shavuot. So let us begin, and we'll see how much we can do in the limited time that we have. Okay, it's very rare that we have a picture from the 14th century which illustrates a custom. We'll get back to the picture in a moment. First, I want to study with you this 1 paragraph. And on the sheets here, which I hope we can transmit to you later, on the sheets here I also included an English translation of this paragraph by Professor Ivan Marcus. Professor Ivan Marcus wrote an entire book about this custom. It's called Rituals of Childhood, Jewish Acculturation in Medieval Europe, published by Yale University Press. It also exists in Hebrew. And he devoted an entire book to this custom. But really, if we look at this paragraph in front of us, and then at the picture, we have most of what we need to know about this custom. And this is the custom of the initiation of the child into the cheder on the holiday of Shavuot. And there are 4 early medieval sources about this custom, and this is my favorite. This is from Sefer HaRokeach, written by Rabbi Elazar of Worms, who died in the year 1235. And he describes what is already clearly a full-blown custom. And I'm going to skip most of the verses so we can just stick to the facts of what happens in the custom. Minhag Avotenu is the custom of our ancestors, Shemoshivim Tinokot Li'amod b'Shavuot, that I'm on this line here, that we put the children, or we place them to study for the first time in Shavuot. And we cover the child, Shemechasim HaNa'ar, we cover the child, and he's not really a nar, he's not a young man, he's really a very young boy. You'll see in the picture in a minute, 3, 4, 5 years old, so that he should not see a dog on the day when he learns the holy letters. Why? Good question. Kalot HaShachar, I'm on the 3rd line, at sunrise, Yom HaTzeret on Shavuot, Nevi'im HaNe'arim, and we take the young men, meaning again the really little boys, and each time they quote a verse to back it up, and I'm going to skip the verses. And we cover him up on the 4th line under a cloak, mi beit tamad beit hakneset, from the house until the synagogue, o ad beit harav, or until the house of the Rebbe. V'notnin oto b'cheiko shel harav, and we're now on the 5th line, and we put him in the lap of the rabbi, hamoshivam lilmod, who is placing them, who is getting them ready to study Torah, really to learn Hebrew. And each time a verse is quoted. In this case, 2 verses. Umeviim aluach, which is the 6th or 7th line at the beginning of the line. Umeviim aluach shekatuv alav aleph bet gimel dalet tav shin reish kuf. The first 4 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the last 4 letters going backwards, right? Avgad is going forwards, Tashrak is going backwards. The slate has the letters of the Hebrew alphabet written on it in this special fashion, plus the verse Toratzi balanu Moshe. God, Moses commanded us the Torah. Torate umanuti, may the Torah be my livelihood, my profession. Vayikra el Moshe, and the first verse of Leviticus. V'korei harav kolot v'ot mina aleph bet, and the rabbi reads every single letter of the aleph bet. V'atinok acharav, and the child after him is simply aping the words. Clearly the child doesn't know Hebrew, he doesn't know the aleph bet, doesn't know Hebrew, he says whatever the Rebbe says. V'chol teva shel tashrak v'atinok acharav, and every single thing related to the letters of the alphabet he repeats after him, including the verses. V'chein vayikra, and the beginning of the book of Leviticus. By the way, a pedagogical aside, they used to start both in the Talmudic period and the medieval period by teaching children the book of Vayikra. Why? Because Vayikra represents holiness, represents purity, and the children are holy and pure. Did the children really understand anything about the sacrifices? Ich weiß nicht, I have no idea. But that is what they taught them both in the Talmudic period and the medieval period, the beginning of Vayikra. V'loten al haluach me'at dvash, and they put on the slate a little bit of honey. V'locheh chanar hadvash shala otiot, and the young man, the boy, he licks the honey from the letters, bilshono, with his tongue. Ve'achar kach mevim ha'uga shenilosha bidvash, and then they bring honey cake. V'katuv alea, and then on the honey cake they wrote a very long set of verses from Yeshayahu chapter 50. And I'm going to skip after the verse. V'korei harav kol teva shel ele psukim nara harav. And the rabbi reads every word of these verses, and the child repeats after it. V'achar kach mevi'im beitza mevushelet uklufa klipa. And then they bring a hard-boiled egg without the shell. V'katuv alea, and it says on that egg, and how exactly they wrote on the egg, I have no idea. They write a verse from Yechezkel chapter 3, 2 lines. V'korei harav, I'm down here, if you can see the arrow. V'korei harav kol tevav anar harav. The rabbi reads every word, child repeats it. U'machilim lanar ha'uga va'beitza ki tov hu liftichat halev. And they feed the child the cake and the hard-boiled egg because it's good to open up the heart. The heart here probably means the mind. In the medieval period, they thought that your mind was in your heart. When they talk about knowing something in your heart, it means knowing something in your mind. And a person should not change the customs. And then he quotes a number of standard sources which say how important customs are in Judaism. So you see, Rabbi Eliezer of Worms is quoting this full-blown minhag around the year 1200 or the early 13th century in Germany. And it has all these details, bringing the child to the cheder while he's cloaked, sitting him in the Rebbe's lap, the slate, the egg, the cake, all these different aspects of the custom. And the amazing thing about this is if we go back to the picture, it is very rare that we have a medieval picture which fully illustrates a custom. And this is taken from the famous Leipzig Machzer. Now it's upside down. There we go. And I photographed this from a wonderful book, which I cannot say is a bestseller, but it should be. It's called Jewish Life in the Middle Ages by Teresa Mendel Metzger. It has hundreds of pictures of medieval Jews. And the Leipzig Machzer has a picture here, and you see the Jews are wearing their special hats, which Dr. Shula Letterman could give you an entire lecture on. And you see that the faces of the Jews look a little bit like birds, which reminds us of the bird's head's Haggadah, but that's the subject of a different lecture. What interests me is that in the pictures in front of you, you have all the aspects of this ceremony. In the middle picture, you have the father carrying the boy to the cheder. He's wrapped in a cloak. The original is not that clear either, but he's wrapped in a cloak. He's carrying him to the Rebbe, who's over here. A child is sitting on the Rebbe's lap. In one hand, he is holding a hard-boiled egg. In the other hand, he is holding a cake. And the Rebbe is holding a slate. Well, you can't see it, but it's there, trust me. And the other two children are standing here holding up their egg and their cake. In other words, they're exhibiting all the aspects of the ceremony. After walking to the cheder, the Rebbe has the slate. The children are holding the egg and the cake, which obviously is what interests them. They get to eat at the end, right? You all know the famous saying about Jewish holidays. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. But that's not the pidgam, that's not the saying of Shavuot. In this case, it's let's eat, even though they didn't try to kill us. And on the right hand, we have here an aspect of the ceremony which is not mentioned in the Rokeach, but which is mentioned by another important medieval source about the custom, that after the ceremony is over in the Rebbe's house or in the Beit Knesset, they walk to a body of water, and the children hold up the egg or the cake next to the body of water. So we see here in this one beautiful illustration from the Leipzig Machzor around the year 1310, in other words, approximately 100 years after the description by Rabbi Elazar of Vermeiza, we have here an illustration of the Leipzig Machzor of the exact custom that we just saw. What were the modern permutations, or the medieval and modern permutations of this custom? What happened is that this custom spread throughout the Jewish world, and it even made it to Morocco. And there's a famous song in Israel by Habrera TV Shlomo Bar, which is called Etzleinu Bekfar Tudra, by us in the village of Tudra in the Atlas Mountains. I'm going to play you a few bars of the song. Sorry, you'll have to look up the rest on YouTube. Right in Shlomo Bar, Etzleinu Bekfar Tudra, by us in Kfar Tudra, you hear the song. And the words of the song says they would take a child at the age of 5, a wreath of flowers they make for him in Kfar Tudra, and all the children in the street make a big chagiga, a big celebration, and machnisim bebeit knesset, they bring him into the synagogue, they write on a slate made out of wood, in honey, from the letters from Aleph until Taf, at Kol HaOtiyot, all the letters of the alphabet, and the Torah in his mouth was as sweet as honey. So we see that this custom, which, as I said, Professor Ivan Mark has devoted an entire book to the custom, this custom spread throughout the Ashkenazic lands, then it spread to North Africa, and it's still observed today in the state of Israel. When children get their first Siddur or their first Chumash, the parents come to the kindergarten or the first grade, and what do? They throw candies at them. Perhaps it's easier to lick honey, I don't know, but they throw candies at them to signify the fact that the Torah is sweet. So this is the first Shavuot custom that I wanted to present to you, which is so well documented in Professor Marcus's book, and these 3 pages of the English translation. Okay. Now we move on to custom number 2. And about this, I published an entire responsum. And if you're interested, you can read it on the Schechter Institute website. Why do Jews eat milk and dairy products on Shavuot? Just write in Google the title and you will find the entire responsum. And if you like books, it appeared in my book, Response in a Moment, Volume 4. Well, anybody today knows that in Israel, the biggest symbol of Shavuot is dairy products. And every year they announce at some point on the radio or on the television how many tons of cheese they have sold and how many liters of milk. And it's always some astronomical number of hundreds of thousands of liters of milk and tons of cheese. So I was asked, what is the origin of this custom? And it took me about 11 pages to answer the question. So I'm only going to present 2 of the early sources, a few homiletic explanations, and then I believe what is the real reason for the custom. So the first early source is in a book that was only published 25 years ago, written by Rabbi Avigdor Tzarfati, which is a fascinating book. It's a commentary on the Torah that contains the teachings of the Baalei HaTosafot, of the Tosafis. It has many laws and customs that nobody else quoted. He has very interesting passages about women wearing talit and tefillin and making kiddush and all sorts of other stuff that nobody else talks about in France in the 13th century. So he is the first person to mention this custom. The world asks why we eat bladin or vladin on Shavuot, bet lamed daled nun, and it seems that there is a hint in the Torah in one of the verses related to Shavuot, and on the day of the first fruits, and uviyom bikurim, when you sacrifice, ba'akrivchem mincha chadasha ladonai b'shavuotechem. You notice that I put three letters in bold, chet, lamed, and bet, which of course refer to the word chalav, and that was no doubt the pshat of the Torah, that the words mincha chadasha ladonai b'shavuotechem, a new meal offering to God in Shavuot, refers to chet, lamed, bet, which is Rashi Tevot or the letters of the word chalav. And this is an abbreviation of chalav and Shavuot, but fladin, I don't know. By the way, if you go to Hungary, you can still buy fladin. My wife and I were there last summer when you could still travel, and we bought fladin in Hungary. It's not exactly the same recipe today. And the next reference is from Rav Aaron HaKohen of Lunel in Orchot Chaim around the year 1300, and also in the book that's called Kolbo, Provence. And it is customary to eat honey and milk on the first day, because Torah is compared to honey and milk, as it is said in Shir HaShirim, in the Song of Songs, Dvash v'chalav mitachat l'shonech. Honey and milk are under your tongue. Why they brought a verse from Shir HaShirim when they could have brought a verse connected to Shavuot, I don't know. But that is their explanation for eating the milk on Shavuot around the year 1300 in Provence. And now in my responsum, I brought 8 homiletic explanations as to why we do this. I will give you a spoiler. I don't find any of them convincing in the slightest, though they are certainly very interesting. We already saw the reference to the Song of Songs, Dvash v'chalav. We saw the reference to Numbers 28, the letters chalav in that verse. There is a gematria from Eben Bochan, which was written in the 13th century, that they say that the number 613 hints at Dvash chalav kimcha desmida, that in gematria 613 is equivalent to the words honey, milk, flour, and fine flour. The only problem being that it's off by one number, but when it comes to gematria, one off who's counting, zelo chashuv, and therefore that's a convincing gematria. My brother Cantor Abe Golinkin, as well as David Zimberg, in his articles on the subject of this custom, suggest that the Dvash v'chalav are not from the verse we quoted above, but rather from Deuteronomy chapter 26, which was, of course, recited when they gave the Bikurim, the first fruits in the temple. And he brought us to this place, Vayvienu el hamakom hazeh, vayiten lanu et haaretz hazot, eretz zavat chalav udvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. So there's a stronger Shavuot connection with milk and honey, or chalav, milk in gematria is 40, which is, of course, the number of days that Moses spent on Mount Sinai. So the chalav that we drink or eat reminds us of Moses on Mount Sinai. And finally, the most famous homiletic explanation, which is number 8, which was first suggested 200 years ago in 1821. When the children of Israel returned from Mount Sinai to their tents, they could not eat meat because they would have needed to slaughter the animals according to all of the new laws which they had just received. So they ate dairy products instead. Therefore, we eat dairy products in memory of this event. This was the explanation I was given as a child. It didn't convince me then. It still doesn't convince me, but it's the most popular explanation for eating dairy products on Shavuot. So then I give modern historical explanations. I will skip Bialik and H.L. Ginsberg. Professor Theodor Gaster, whom, as you may know, was an expert in comparative folklore, published many books on the subject. By the way, Professor Gaster knew 24 languages. Professor Gaster says in his book on the Jewish festivals, at the analogous Scottish celebration of Beltane on May 1st, dairy dishes are commonly consumed, and churning and cheese making are a common feature of spring harvest festivals in many parts of the world. In Macedonia, for instance, the Sunday before Lent is known as Cheese Sunday. In several districts of Germany, cheese and dairy dishes are or were standard fare at Whitsun, which is the seventh Sunday after Easter. Professor Gaster loves to say that Jewish minhagim are based on non-Jewish customs. But of course, this explanation begs the question, okay, so we copied the cheese from non-Jews, but why were the non-Jews eating cheese on May 1st or in the month of May or June? And the explanation is found in my last paragraph, the simplest, which was suggested by John Cooper and Dr. Ben Elton. As Elton wrote, the reason we have milky foods on Shavuot is probably because the festival falls in the calving season when there is a large amount of surplus milk. Or as Cooper wrote, there was an abundance of milk at this time of year, and that in Rosh Hashanah Shavuot there was a glut of milk. And this is what Jeffrey Singman wrote in his daily life in medieval Europe. Milk was available principally in the spring and summer, once the calves were weaned and when fodder was plentiful. Since it did not keep well, especially in an age before refrigeration, most milk was made into butter and cheese. In other words, the reason that we have milky products, dairy products at Shavuot, is the same reason that the Scottish had their Beltane and all the other customs that Professor Gaster cites. At this time of year, there was a glut of milk, and people had to use the milk because there were no refrigerators, and therefore they made cheesecake and fladen and all the other beautiful recipes we have on Shavuot. So this is the simple historical explanation for our custom of eating milk and dairy products in Shavuot. But as you eat your cheese blintzes on Shavuot, or your barekas, or your cheesecake, you can think about all of the beautiful homiletic explanations that we saw before, and I can only say b'te'avon, enjoy. And finally, the last custom I would like to present this evening or this afternoon, depending on where you are, is a custom that I was introduced to in a very sudden fashion many years ago when I was walking back from the Kotel at about 7 o'clock in the morning after having stayed up all night. Unfortunately, this year I will not be going to the Kotel because of the coronavirus, but since 1973, I have been at the Kotel almost every year on Shavuot, and it takes about 45, 50 minutes to walk from my house to the Kotel, and I walk there with a lot of other people at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then we have tefillot at the Kotel Masarti from 5 to 7, and then I walk home. So one year I was walking home at 7:30 in the morning. I'm absolutely exhausted. I round a corner in my neighborhood, and I'm confronted by some young urchins, by some young boys who look like they're about 10 or 11 years old, and they throw water bombs at me, bags full of water, which of course explode and make me all wet. I was of course very upset. I had no idea what they were doing or why they were doing it, and what in the world do water bombs have to do with Shavuot? So years later, I decided to look into this custom, and I discovered that this is a very widespread custom among North African Jews, especially the Jews of Libya and the Jews of Morocco. So here, for example, is a description from the Jews of Libya in the 1930s. This is before the Jews made Aliyah from Libya to the land of Israel. B'chag HaShavuot acharei hatzoraim, on Shavuot after in the afternoon, they pour water from nodot, from skins, le'ot bracha, as a sign of blessing, and their non-Jewish neighbors encourage them to pull up, to draw as much water as possible, ki gam hem ma'aminim, because they believe that this simchat bet shoeva, that this drawing of water, is using the same expression as we use on Sukkot, zo zchut is a merit, be'alula la'avi shanag shuma u'mevarechet. And by pouring the water, they will have a rainy year. Similarly, we have a description of this in the famous book by Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Toledano, which describes the Jews of Morocco. The book was originally published in 1911. And what does Rabbi Toledano say? B'chag HaShavuot, it's the last passage. Yadua ben Yudei Morocco minhag haza'at hamayim. Is known among the Jews of Morocco the custom of drawing water. Gdolimu ktanim yishpechu ish ish al makaro kadei mayim. The young and the old throw pitchers of water on each other, and they also dunk each other in the river, not taking into account the fact that it's ruining their beautiful Yom Tov clothing. And especially at Mincha time, before Tfilat Mincha, they read the Azharot, which are beautiful piyutim, beautiful liturgical poems, which include the 613 mitzvot. So before reading the Azharot, or while reading the Azharot, everybody reads one passage, and the last one who reads the Azharot, Yitnaplu alav behazod mayim, they fall upon him with throwing water, or they dunk him in the river, whether he wants to or not. So we see that what happened to me on the street corner in Jerusalem actually started out in Libya and in Morocco at least 150, 200 years ago. And as is frequently the case, there's an entire article on the subject by Professor Daniel Sperber in his book Minhagei Israel, Volume 8. And there he documents the custom, and it turns out that this was really a custom of the Berbers, of the non-Jews of Libya and of North Africa. The Berbers were there before the Muslim conquest. And the Berbers had a custom in the late spring, early summer of throwing water at each other. And as usual, the reasons for the custom are lost in hoary antiquity. The Jews of North Africa adopted the custom. But the irony of this situation is, what did the non-Jews call the custom? Let me see if I can find the word. They called the custom in Arabic El Ansara. Ansara. Now, Ansara sounds like Sarah's name, who's hosting us this evening. But Ansara is a corruption of the word Atzeret, which is one of the Hebrew names for Shavuot. So ironically, this non-Jewish custom, which we adopted and started throwing water at each other on Shavuot in Morocco and North Africa, in Arabic, it got the name Ansara, which is Atzeret, which is our name for the holiday of Shavuot. So we borrowed from them and they borrowed from us, and this became a very, very popular custom in North Africa among Jews and non-Jews in the hot summer months of throwing water at each other. And who knows, it could be the real reason was that they wanted to cool each other off. But the bottom line is, if you ever visit Jerusalem or Israel on the holiday of Shavuot and a child throws a water bomb at you, don't get upset. Say Chag Sameach, because this is their way of celebrating Shavuot for the past few hundred years among Jews of Morocco and Libya. If you have any questions, I know our time is over, but I certainly don't mind anybody who wants to still remain online if you have a few questions. And if not, I wish all of you a very joyful Shavuot. Whether you lick your slate, eat your honey cake, eat your hard-boiled egg, eat your cheesecake, or throw water at each other, you should all have a wonderful Shavuot. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned the resemblance to birds. What was that in reference to?
The resemblance to birds? In which passage?
Well, you mentioned it. Well, it wasn't in the passage. It was in the drawing.
Why are the Jews portrayed as birds? There are all sorts of theories about the bird's head Agada, which apply to the bird's head Agada is simply the most famous example. It was written in Ashkenaz around the year 1300 in Germany. But I believe there are 11 manuscripts from the medieval period which feature birds' heads. And there are all sorts of interesting explanations. One is that the birds represented the freedom of the eagle. I shall take you on the wings of eagles out of Egypt. And therefore the Jews were portrayed as birds. The only problem with that as explanation is that Jews are also portrayed as birds in books that are not Haggadot. So what does that have to do with eagles? Other explanations include the fact that birds have some sort of magical powers, and therefore by portraying the Jews as birds, you were somehow saying that they're above all of the tsaros, all of the problems that they have in the medieval period. In the book that I edited, the Schechter Haggadah, which has 115 illustrations of different Haggadot, I included a number of beautiful illustrations from the Bird's Head Haggadah, and there I summarized some of the theories about why birds' heads. Other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions or comments, we wish you all a Chag Sameach.
Rabbi, can you hear me?
Yes, Mel.
Okay, I got a question.
Sure.
Since the second day of Yom Tov is Shabbat, does that mean we have meat on Shabbat? Since on Shabbat you're not supposed to do other stuff, all
Right.
other customs are forbidden.
Right. Well, you'll see in my responsum, I bring all sorts of, one of the ways we know about the dairy customs is because a lot of the poskim, a lot of the rabbis and the halachic authorities discuss this tension. They say on the one hand, you're supposed to eat meat on Yontiv because ein simcha ela bebasar, meat makes you happy. On the other hand, we have this custom that you have to eat milk. So what are you going to do? Are you going to eat meat and then wait a few hours until you eat milk? So some people say you eat milk first. Other people say that you eat meat and then wait whatever your custom is, and then you eat milk. And then there's also a discussion about whether the dairy is eaten on the first day of Shavuot or on the second day of Shavuot. So if you'll read the responsum on the Schechter website, you'll see all the various attitudes towards how you can have the meat of Yontov as the same time as you're having the cheese of Shavuot. I'll just say I don't have that tension because I'm a vegetarian. So since I don't eat meat, I can just eat milk on Shavuot. But for those who eat meat and milk, it is a bit of a tension. So some people have one meal meat and another meal dairy, so they can get in both customs.
One question, Rabbi Golinkin.
Yes, Alan, how are you?
Hi, I may be one of the few people who could not hear it, but the second song of Naomi Zentner was not at all audible to me.
Oh,
I
I'm
saw
sorry.
she had earphones on, and I don't know if any of the others could also not see it, but it sounded like it was good. But anyway.
Well, I did hear it. It's a famous Israeli song from 1956 about the Sinai campaign.
Right, so it's a popular song. Well,
Right.
This is unbelievably interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. One last question or comment before we sign off? Well, we thank you all very much. Chag Sameach. And if any of you speak Hebrew, on Wednesday night, we're having another 8 sessions of the Tikkun sponsored by Schechter. Only 2 of the lectures overlap, the music and art lectures. The other 6 lectures will be different. So if any of you are Hebrew speakers, you're welcome to tune in Wednesday night, same time, 7 to 11 p.m. Israel time, for 8 lectures in Hebrew regarding the holiday of Shavuot. Chag Sameach.